the wake of Brown versus Board of Education decision that forced the schools to desegregate. Soon after Brown, white Southern supremacists warned that they would pull their children out of the schools if desegregation was forced upon them. And they did just that, forming white-only academies called, which we call segregation academies. And this was done throughout the South. In Prince Edward's County, they went a step further and literally closed down the entire public school system in 1959. The Virginia legislature then authorized Friedman-style vouchers, but only for the white students, leaving the black families to fend for themselves. Flash forward about 40 years to Florida. Florida adopted Friedman's call to privatize education in 1998 when a rich Tampa venture capitalist by the name of John Kirtley set up the first private voucher scholarship program in Florida. Over the next 25 years, Florida built a vast $1.4 billion voucher empire under Kirtley's leadership. Today, between vouchers and charter schools, Florida is the most privatized system in the nation. For people like Kirtley, however, the fact that 80% of parents still choose public education for their children is a problem. That's a problem to him. He's hoping that HB 1 changes that. So what exactly is HB 1 and its companion bill, SB 202? And when I say HB, that's House Bill 1 and Senate Bill 202. These bills are modeled after legislation that passed the Arizona legislature in June 2022, so just a year ago last June, and that now have income caps, remove the caps and make them universal, meaning that any school-age child, including those attending private schools, are eligible to receive nearly $8,000 and more if the child has a disability in an education savings account. Again, that's that word, education savings account, ESA. This money can be spent on a marketplace modeled after Amazon, literally modeled after Amazon, called in Florida, they call it My Scholarships Shop. While some states even use debit cards, Florida uses accounts. Spending options include private schools, but also goes way beyond. It also includes tutoring services, part-time public school tuition, college tuition, therapy. Any recipient of an ESA, or in this case the parents, can save a portion of the ESA up to $24,000 over the lifetime to be used for higher education or training after graduation, which pretty much would pay for currently for a Florida State University or college education. What about accountability and transparency? We have all heard that the lack of it in vouchers, about the lack of it in voucher schools, but with ESAs, there's even less. In the small ES program that Florida has run for years for students with disabilities, so it's not a totally new thing, but this is a huge expansion. There have been significant concerns about that. In other states, widespread abuse has occurred as the programs expanded. Even more seriously, the ESA model pushes us back to the 19th century, stripping societal responsibility for education, instead making it an individual parental responsibility. That's really an important part of it. Then there's SB 202, which has one added feature to it. It actually calls for the deregulation of public education. It wants the state to look at every regulation and decide whether to keep them, amend them, dump them. And that's rather than the general call has been to regulate the private schools that currently have almost no regulation. But there's even more to ESAs that meet the eye. There are fundamental differences between a voucher and an education savings account, and these differences make the ESA-based legislation extremely dangerous. You may have heard the advocates of privatization saying, quote, "The money should follow the child," unquote. This is exactly what an ESA does. A voucher goes directly to pay a school or a service, while an ESA goes directly to the child with the control given to the parent. And here lies the real danger. And the real danger in my eyes is impossible future legislation. Future legislation could be written, and I'm telling you, I read all their stuff. They're talking about this. This is not like my pipe dream. This is very much part of the plan. What they could do is mandate that every child receive an ESA. And we talk about how it's like a universal voucher system, but it's still voluntary. You have to opt into it. There could be legislation, and many of the privatizers want this, where it's mandatory that every student will have an ESA. Then rather than funding school districts, as we now do, in this scenario, the district would be broken up into separate competing schools on the marketplace. So you'd have Booker High on the marketplace, Venice High, all the different elementary schools. They'd be all separate. With this model, individual schools, be they public or private, the private schools would be on also, the charter schools, would be funded directly through the ESA, bypassing the central school district. The central administration of a school board would be out of business, as would the elected school board. There would be no need for those pesky teacher unions. 100% privatization could be achieved literally overnight with that type of legislation. And I want to repeat, it's not here now, but that's what they're talking about. And the people that are talking about it are at the think tanks, like the Goldwater Institute. They were very key in creating the ESA concept. The Heritage Foundation, they're very much involved in all the culture war and privatization type stuff. Koch's, ALEC, all these folks brought ESAs in the first place, but they have grand plans for ESAs in the future. So who are the pushers of ESA right now? Betsy DeVos. She sees ESAs as a way to bring her style of Christian nationalism to children. Last December, she came to DeSantis' Freedom Blueprint event, pushing ESAs. That was her big message. Chris Rufo, the Manhattan Institute CRT carpetbagger now trying to destroy New College, joined Betsy in writing a letter to Florida legislators just about a month ago, urging them to pass HB 1. Former and current Florida Education Commissioners, Richard Corcoran, and the current one, Manny Diaz, are their biggest cheerleaders. Corcoran said recently at Hillsdale College that Florida is getting close to crossing the Rubicon to full privatization. AstroTurf groups like Moms for Liberty are also on board, serving as major lobbyists for these bills. In closing, will we be able to stop HB 1 and SB 202? To be honest, probably not. Not on this round. But Ohio, though, recently did reject it, so there's hope. So I don't want to say it's not going to happen, but if you look at the committee vote, where it has gone through committees, it's been pretty much party line, and with super majorities. So it doesn't look great, but we really have to loudly sound the alarm of what these bills will mean to our democracy, not just to education, but to our democracy in general. We must build a broad movement so powerful that we can reverse what has happened in Florida over the past 25 years, and instead invest in people and vital institutions so that all of us, including our public schools, can flourish. So what I would like to do now is introduce our MC for the evening, Harold Young. Harold is a graduate of the University of Baltimore School of Law and a member of the Maryland State Bar Association. He also holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in economics from Virginia State University and a Master of Arts in Urban Planning and Policy Analysis from Morgan State University. Harold also served as the director of the Maryland office of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, where he was employed for 31 years. He had responsibility for enforcing the Fair Housing and Community Development regulations, and advised HUD secretaries and other senior department officials on specific housing and community development needs of local government. He's also the first vice president of Manasota ASALA, which I think is a critical part of your current biography. So I'd like to welcome Harold, and he's going to take over this seat now.
Well, good evening, everyone. Good evening. How ironic it is that I was in the 5th grade when the Supreme Court rendered its Brown versus Board of Education decision. How ironic it is that I'm from Virginia, and I know a bit about school segregation during that period. And to add more fuel to this, I studied economics, and one of the reference books was Milton Friedman, for crying out loud. So how did y'all find me?
and we didn't even talk about this.
It's incredible. It is my job to introduce to you our outstanding panelists. First, we have Dr. Noreen Dollard. Dr. Dollard has more than 30 years of health service research and evaluation experience in Florida and in New York in the area of behavioral health needs of children and families across child serving systems. She has been responsible for or directed all aspects of research, the research process, including design, implementation, and analysis, interpretation, and dissemination, typically using mixed methods approach to data collection and analysis. Dr. Dollard has directed both federally and state-funded evaluation and research projects as Kids Count director, sponsored by Annie Casey Foundation. She leveraged her experience with large administrative data sets to inform child and family policy with the data. She holds a doctorate in education from the University of South Florida and a master's of public administration from the University at Albany State University of New York. Our next panelist is Rebecca Leopold. She grew up in Sarasota as a graduate of Riverview High School. After earning her master's degree in history and teaching, she began teaching for Sarasota County Schools. She loves working with her 6th graders and supporting their development as independent learners and kind community members. So far, Rebecca has enjoyed her career in the classroom and looks forward to many, many more years as a classroom teacher. Dr. Theoni Sublis is professor of education. She teaches graduate courses including school law and professional ethics and social change and school reform, and undergraduate courses including adolescent literacy and classroom management. Dr. Sublis has published articles about teaching for social justice and the effects of such policy as No Child Left Behind. Her record exemplifies her commitment to public education. She has been a resident of Sarasota County for nearly 40 years. She taught literature at Riverview High and was educated in Sarasota Public Schools from middle grades through college, and her daughter is currently enrolled in Sarasota County Schools. Give my panelists here a round of applause. I have a broad question I want to ask of each of the panelists. And it is, from your role, policy analyst, school board member, teacher, and parent, within Sarasota County Schools, what impact do you think the potential loss of 70% of state aid or $60 million will have on the Sarasota County School District? Doctor?
Hi, thank you for that introduction. I really need to work on my bio and make it a little more succinct. Anyways, it's longer than my talk. All joking aside, HB1 and SB 202 have great potential to devastate our public schools as we know it already statewide. Right this minute, we already know that $1.4 billion is being taken out of state coffers and given directly to private schools. And every school district, sorry, Zoom. And every school district stands to lose a substantial part of their public money. And, $60 million is not chump change. And I would be very concerned because, as you know, I'm probably preaching to the choir, but, schools have fixed costs. They have buildings, they have people, they have buses and things that they have to maintain. They have contracts that they have to live up to. And taking money away from those state funds, the money might follow the child. More on that in a minute. But the full cost of educating the children will not follow the students. That will still be on the school district's responsibility, even though they were not afforded the resources to provide education for what's going to be a new influx of students who've never touched public education before.
Do you want more comments on that same question?
I do.
I echo what Noreen has to say about devastating any dollar taken away from already scarce funds in public education is going to have a detrimental impact to learning. And I heard on the news recently people who are in support of SB 202 and HB 1 that this is for our kids. I hear that statement often. Our kids deserve this. And my response to that is I think that this is on the backs of our students. I don't think that this is for our students. I think that our students are getting caught in the crosshairs, and they're going to feel it more than any adult is going to feel it. The student is going to feel it even more than the teacher is going to feel it, probably because the teachers are going to leave. So the answer is a resounding yes to the question. I have some other things to say, but I think I'm going to wait for some other comments later. But I'm in full agreement that no good can come from defunding public schools. I can't see the positive there.
Okay, thank you very much.
Oh, you have one.
They gave me my own. Yay. Hello. I first want to say that I really appreciate being invited to take part in this panel tonight, and that the program organizers sought the input of teachers' voices on this very critical issue. I am a little nervous. I'm definitely out of my comfort zone. I'm more comfortable in front of my 12-year-olds than I am in a room full of adults and on Zoom, but I'll do my best. I am not going to leave education. I love teaching. I considered several other career opportunities before finally realizing that teaching is my calling, and I'm determined to stick with it no matter how difficult it gets. My colleagues and I will sometimes play the lottery, and we have like a little running joke, and they'll say, "Hey, Leopold, if we hit the 5 million this week, will we see you tomorrow?" And I always say yes. I'll always show up the next day, no matter even, with all the money in the world, teaching is my calling, and in the classroom with my students is where I want to be every single day, because I love it. And I'm really determined to support my students through very important transitions and times in their development, and I'm always guided by the desire to make sure that they get to live really fulfilling lives, and they get to live lives based on choice. And I don't want my students to ever be limited in their opportunities, or to be taken advantage of by others, or to not be able to achieve their goals and dreams because of a lack of academic ability. So that's what guides me in the classroom. But more to your question on HB1, we can talk a little bit more about specifically how it can impact classrooms later, but I'm definitely in opposition to the bill for more reasons that we can get into later.
Great. Thank you so very much. Now, let's take a deeper dive into some of these issues. I have a specific question for each of you, starting with Dr. Dollard. There's a huge disparity between your estimated fiscal impact. This is the Florida Policy Institute, $4 billion, and the legislature's estimate of $209 million. This is largely due to the House Bill 1 sponsors asserting that with fewer students, fewer state dollars are needed. In your analysis, how and why would the loss of per pupil funds not be offset by the corresponding drop in public school enrollment?
Yes, and what you've heard in the committee meetings, if you're a strange, wonky person like me, is that they're asserting that the dollars are going to follow the children out of public schools. We're already paying for those kids, and so the money's just going to go with them. The problem is one thing that was not accounted for in their calculations is they have expanded eligibility to children who are homeschooled and technically in the home education program, and children who are in private school are already eligible, but the numbers of them, when you take the income caps off, are quite substantial. And so our estimates consider both the homeschool students, which are newly eligible under HB1, the private school students who are not in private schools right now, but who've never been in public school, and they're not, former public school students receiving these vouchers. So they've never touched the public education system, so how can the money follow them? The math doesn't work there. We know from watching Arizona, for example, who's the only one so far to have a universal voucher program. It started not even at the beginning of this school year, so something like October. They budgeted $30 million. They are in the hole currently for $300 million and are looking to having to expend $500 million next year. And that's because more than 75% of the new applicants for these vouchers are students in private schools who've never been in public school. I mean, as a private school parent, why wouldn't you take the money? As a home education parent, why wouldn't you take the money? I mean, I don't know that there's much of a question there. So I guess in sum, I would just say that we don't think the House, in preparing their estimates, fully considered all the possibilities, and they didn't look to examples that exist in other states.
Okay, for Dr. Suplis, I have a question for you. In teacher training programs, are students knowledgeable about the threats of school privatization? Is it being discussed in the classroom? How would you explain legislation like HB1 to prospective teachers?
Thank you. That's a good question. There's a balance that we have in undergraduate teacher preparation, which is we don't want to scare them out of the profession, so we have to be careful there. And then I think the real responsibility comes in graduate preparation. So students in the graduate programs that I work in are definitely having the conversation at deeper levels versus the undergraduate students who are just about to launch into the career. But we certainly have guest speakers. We certainly have panels similar to this. And they're invited into the discussions in the schools where they do their student teaching. So they're aware, but I would say the awareness level can absolutely increase. There's 3 specific concerns that we talk about often with legislation like this. It's not just about school vouchers, but since we're talking about school vouchers, we bring these 3 conversations to the forefront with students who are studying to be teachers. And it's specifically having to do with Senate Bill 202. As Carol pointed out, it's the House bill, but it adds the deregulation. The deregulation component, Noreen just spoke about the fiscal component, which is a highlight and huge concern to all of us, but the deregulation component, especially for people who train teachers, is of high concern. And it's on 3 levels. It's on the curriculum level, it's on the assessment level, and it's on the teacher credentialing level. And all of those areas are going to be impacted by deregulation. So I'll just give you some brief examples of those 3 areas. The first one is curriculum. Carol spoke about this choice program, almost likened to Amazon, that where the money will be spent in the curriculum options. And curriculum is already a multi-billion-dollar industry in the public education system. So to expand that industry is of high concerns to those of us who believe deeply in true public education. So deregulating the curriculum and putting it on the marketplace is going to add so much confusion to already muddied waters on how to navigate the K through 12 education system, period. But now we're going to muddy and confuse even more, and I think also by design, right? We're going to do that by design, a lot of smoke and mirrors because other things are happening behind the scenes, which Carol also spoke to, some of these big think tanks that are making quite a bit of money off of this. Again, I go back to off the backs of our children. The second area is an assessment. And since the Jeb Bush administration, those of you who've been in Florida for a few decades now remember Jeb Bush used to be our governor, and he's the one who started the grading system. And that really just made its way across the entire country and ultimately ended up in his brother's administration with No Child Left Behind Act. And within the No Child Left Behind Act, at its inception is a good idea. Diane Ravitch, who's the biggest anti-No Child Left Behind Act person right now, actually was an original writer of No Child Left Behind. And she will argue that at its inception, it's a good idea because we don't want to leave children behind. But what No Child Left Behind failed to do was fund appropriately. It was not capable of funding appropriately. And now these bills, House Bill 1 and Senate Bill 202, are taking that to an even greater extent in saying that we're going to deregulate. Carol talked about this in her opening remarks as well. The original argument was bring the private schools up to par with the assessment systems of the public schools. And the private schools have been pushing back against that. And the private school parents have been really good at pushing against that. So this Congress has flipped it and said, let's bring the standards down. Let's bring the standards down. Instead of having private schools meet the standards of the public schools, let's eliminate the standards of the public schools to create that equal playing field. The argument is an equal playing field. I don't call it an equal playing field. I call it a swampland. That is what they're creating, a place where no one will be successful because the money's going to be gone. And the last thing, and I'll close my remarks, is the deregulation when it comes to teacher certification. And the reason why that is really terrifying to me is because they want to move teacher credentialing. Right now, you can be a teacher in the state of Florida without a permanent certificate for up to 3 years. I don't know if you know that. So you can have a college degree and you can get a job as a teacher and you can teach out of field without your permanent certification. And there's certain things you have to do. There's a laundry list of things you have to do to get your permanent certification. And people who teach in the classroom for up to 3 years who cannot complete that checklist, which includes state exams on content awareness. How much do you know about your specific content area? It would be good that a math teacher takes a test in high-level mathematics to make sure that they have the skills to be able to teach mathematics and science. If you can't pass that test, you don't get your certificate, and you're asked to leave. They want to up that to 5 years. So uncredentialed teachers in the classroom for up to 5 years. I think about parents in the room who have very young children who are going to be exposed to that kind of teaching. And there's other ways that we're deregulating the credentials that people need to become teachers in the state. But taking away those certification requirements, as a parent of a child in Sarasota County Schools, I would not want my student working with a teacher who doesn't hold that credential that says, I'm a highly qualified teacher. That was a big plus in No Child Left Behind, by the way, when we talk about what it means to be a highly qualified teacher and to reduce the standards of what it takes to be a highly qualified teacher. Again, is one of the reasons why I am so opposed to this legislation, and I hope that we can sound the bells on making sure that public is aware of what's going on. Thank you. Thank you for listening to all of that.
And now we're going to hear from Rebecca. I have a question for you, Rebecca. When we speak about public education, of course, what unites everyone is a desire to improve education and improve outcomes for our students. Now, from your position as a classroom teacher, what do you believe is the best way to accomplish this?
Thank you for the question. I'd actually first like to address how I believe HB1 will harm public education, because that ties directly into what we can do to actually improve public education. So I would like to talk about the impact of losing funding on our classrooms and on our public schools. As a classroom teacher, it's not my job, it's not my responsibility to deal with school funding, and so I can't say whether when we do face budget cuts, whether that will result in layoffs. I don't know if it's going to result in a 10% decrease in salaries across the board. I don't know if programs will be cut. I don't know if we'll have to shorten our school day. That's not my job to make those decisions, but I really do hope that the people whose job it is to make those decisions really thoughtfully consider the input of parents and teachers and principals once they have to make those hard decisions, because we actually know what students need because we interact with them every day. A little bit was mentioned earlier about the decrease in per pupil funding, and that's, I think, the number that scares me most. So just to reiterate, the FBI has estimated that Sarasota school children will see a decrease of about almost $1,000 per pupil next year of state funding. That represents a 58% decrease in state funding just next year alone. And so I understand that this is, just one group's analysis and one group's projections. However, any decrease in funding is absolutely unacceptable. There is no acceptable amount of decrease in funding for our schools. The only direction we should be going is up, because that's what our students need. Personally, my biggest fears for potential harms in the classroom would be larger class sizes, less money for materials. Just last week, I spent almost $200 on pencils and staplers. For some reason, sixth graders don't know how to use staplers, and they broke all 6 that I started the year out with. Don't understand that one, but I got new staplers because we need more staplers, and our school doesn't have the budget to provide them for me, so I just go out and buy them, as all teachers do. I'm also worried that there will be less money for resources like the technology that our students really need in order to be proficient for higher learning and for their jobs. in the future. Less money for textbooks, less money for programs, and again, potentially a shortened school day, which I know Sarasota is very proud of having our longer school day, and I do hope that we get to keep it. How should we improve public education? Lots of people like to think that they stump me when they ask this question. At Thanksgiving dinners, they go, "So, Rebecca, how do we improve public education? Isn't it impossible? People have been trying for so long." From my vantage point, it is actually quite easy, and the biggest solution, the one that will help the most, is getting more adults in schools with kids, especially coming back from the pandemic. Our students have more needs than ever. So for example, among my 5 classes of 102 students, about 41% of them have either an IEP or a 504 plan, meaning they need and are legally required to have more resources and more support to be successful. These students and other students without those educational plans recently have really struggled with independently initiating their academic tasks. This is just what I'm seeing in the classroom. And I believe it's a direct result of the pandemic, and I think we have an opportunity right now to meet that challenge. And so, like I said, they're having trouble being independent in their assignment and project completion, but they do really well once they have the undivided attention of a really caring adult. They do really well, and it is such a joy to see them succeed when they have the support and the resources that they need. So again, what I would love to see in education is more support for an increased number of adults. Does not necessarily have to be certified teachers. I have a classroom aide who is so helpful, and one of the reasons why I'm very sure that this kind of plan could be really effective for many students. But unfortunately, just having her for a couple periods a day does not cut it. We need more adults, more caring people, more skilled people who are skilled at working with students in our classrooms, and not ones that are there sometimes and then pulled to be substitutes at other times. So that's my answer.
Well, thank you very much. Let's give them a round of applause. I'm enjoying this. So you've heard it from the experts. They've laid out the issues before you. Now, we want to have you, the audience, dig a little deeper. Okay, we have a little correction. We're going to correct this. We have some individual presentations from each of our panelists. We're going to start with Dr. Howard.
Carol already covered a lot of what I said, what I have in the slides, so I'm not going to go through all of them in extreme detail. She did a mighty fine job. So let me just say a little bit about who we are. The Florida Policy Institute is a nonpartisan, nonprofit research group, and we focus on tax and economic policy and work towards ensuring economic opportunity for all Floridians. So just want to give you the commercial about who we are. Next, please. These are the 3 types of vouchers that we have currently. We have traditional ones where tuition is paid right into the private schools, accounts. We have the educational savings accounts, which are basically a debit card that the parents have control over with supervision, with approvals. And then we have the Florida tax credit, which hasn't figured a lot in the conversation, but in the most recent House bill estimate, tax credits don't cost per se, but those dollars never go to general revenue that they could be allocated for other things like education, but maybe a hospital, a public good. So tax credits are a little bit different than traditional vouchers and ESAs because they divert funds from general revenue, whereas the Family Empowerment Scholarships and the Family Empowerment Scholarships for students with unique abilities, that money comes directly out of state general revenue, so the taxes you pay that fill up general revenue and gets allocated by the legislature each year, you pay those taxes. And those dollars come right from the school district's allocations. Currently, I guess Carol said what the eligibility is. It's 375% of the federal poverty level for the Florida Empowerment Scholarships for Educational Options, which is 375% is $112,000 for a family of 4. So it's pretty generous already. For students with disabilities or unique abilities, they are eligible regardless of income. Now, when Speaker Renner introduced the bill, he said that part of his impetus was to cut down on the waiting list for these students with unique abilities being able to access voucher programs, or in their case, traditional vouchers, in their case, educational savings accounts, because they've already been educational savings accounts for a while. And the Florida Tax Credit Scholarship has the same eligibility as the Family Empowerment Scholarship for Educational Options. Next, please. So this is, I already said, this just comes out of general revenue. And the allocations are the same per pupil amount as go to public and charter schools, for that matter. So it's the exact same amount going to these schools. Next, please. So what these bills do, they take off the income tax cap, so millionaires can get them if they want them. There's nothing really different about the FES for unique abilities, although they increase the cap, the number of kids who can receive these scholarships because of the long waiting list. The homeschool kids are now eligible for vouchers, and they have this new fancy thing called Choice Navigators, which in the most recent version of the HB1 is an allowable expense from the vouchers that they can pay for these positions that we think are going to work for the scholarship funding organizations, which are the administrators of these funds. Next, please. Just a quick update, where are we? In the House, HB1 has passed through 2 committees. It's scheduled for its 3rd on Wednesday. In the Senate, it'll hit its 2nd committee on Wednesday. So those of you who are watching the Florida channel, get the popcorn because it's going to be all day. And we fully expect that these will hit the floor in their respective houses fairly soon, probably this month. So this just summarizes where the amount of money, and $4 billion, just so you know, is $1 in $3 of state general revenue funds that the state allocates for education. 1 in 3. Next, please. It matters for the reasons I spoke of earlier. The Arizona experience, where the money could not follow the students because the students were never in public schools. It's a huge amount of money. Something that we haven't mentioned so far, but we really need to, is that if you attend a public school, you have the right to a free and appropriate education. And that means if you have a student with a learning disability or any disability, you have the right to the resources that will make you academically successful. When your parent signs you out of public school and sends you to a private school, and that's the parent's choice, you lose your civil liberties, your due process rights, going to private schools. And private schools are not required to accept you. They are not required to implement an individualized education plan or 504 plan. So I would think parents of kids with disabilities would be very concerned about this. They have no recourse in private schools. And that Theone can talk about the assessment when she has. So, there's nowhere near the accountability and assessment requirements for these private schools. Yeah, and there's a lot of them. If they were going to formulate their own school district, there are more students and a greater budget than runs my school district of Hillsborough County. So we're talking about a lot of dollars that are being taken straight out of public education and given to private schools. Okay, I think that's it. And here I am. Feel free to reach out.
Dr. Sublis?
Thank you for explaining that, Noreen, because that answered a few questions that I still have, because it's confusing, and I appreciate all those comments. I'm going to piggyback. I said a lot when I answered my question that you asked in some of the statements. I wanted to make sure. But I want to piggyback on something that Noreen said about the due process and civil liberties that students give up when they, or parents give them up for their students when they move into the private school. And I also want to talk a little bit about the universal component, where it's not, you don't have to qualify it based on income. So it's open to all families, regardless of income. What happens, I'm kind of going back on Carol, looking into the future, right? Carol's thinking these bills are going to pass, but we need to be looking into the future and be prepared for what's going to happen in the future. And Support Our Schools organization has done a lot of work with previous legislation that came out with the Parental Protections Act, and became known as the Don't Say Gay bill. And we talk about students that are disenfranchised. We talk about populations that are disenfranchised. We talk about students that need more support for a variety of reasons, whether it be because of exceptional abilities or exceptional disabilities, or because they belong to certain demographics. And you can define demographics however you want to, but private schools can design their own admission requirements, and they can choose. Some of the private schools that have a long-standing history, we can look to them and say, okay, well, most students will be able to get into that school. The fear here is that new private schools are going to be developed. These pop-up schools are going to start coming up, and they're going to say no. They're going to say, no, there's certain populations that we don't want to come to our school, and we're going to start seeing these segregated populations. So what happens to the students who don't get into the private schools? Based on demographic, based on income, based on ability, based on disability. What happens to those kids? Well, okay, they always have the public schools, but now the public schools have been defunded. So what kind of education is going to be provided for those students? And I was having a conversation with a colleague of mine who said, well, okay, but what if the student does get accepted, and then they decide that they don't want that student there anymore? And the student is excused from that private institution. Then they go back to the traditional public school system. So that's the way I'm looking down the future road about what's going to happen when we're going to start seeing these by design schools popping up, and the money being filtered into these private schools, and then what's left behind. It's that swampland that I made reference to earlier in my previous remarks. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to share those thoughts as well.
Okay, and Rebecca.
I also have already shared most of what I'd like to tonight, except I'd like to add and piggyback off of what's been said, specifically about students returning to public schools from private institutions. So there is a statistic, I'm not quite sure what it is, maybe one of you have it offhand, about the percentage of students who actually end up returning to public schools, often because they were asked to leave or persuaded to leave their private schools. And when they come back to us, we get several every year, especially at the start of the second semester in January. We got a ton of kiddos from other institutions who were asked to leave. And they come back to us often after having already lost a half a year or more of learning gains. They come back to us with unmet behavioral needs, unresolved behavioral needs. And so now we have to do even more to try to support them, even more to help them get back on track. And we do it, and we love them. I love them. I love all of my kids that I got this year, and I feel very blessed that they came into my classroom. But I love them so much, I'm really upset that the schools they were at failed them, and that they took away precious time from them when they could have been making learning gains, when they could have been resolving some emotional and behavioral issues that they had. And now they're thrown into this new environment after being kicked out of this old environment in a way that can be very harmful for them, and sometimes for the school community that they end up coming into.
And thank you again. Okay, so now we are reaching back out to our audience for your questions. Do we have there's a question right there and a microphone.
I don't see any contact information to save our schools here. Let's say I wanted to join or help or whatever. I looked at everything on my table. There's nothing that says how I get in touch with you. Does somebody have that? Yeah.
Whenever anybody comes to our events and you sign in, you give us your name and your email address, and we put you on our subscription list, and you will get it. But I would be happy to give you my card, okay?
Okay, there's a question there.
Thank you for providing this. 2 questions. Number 1, what do we say to other people? Why is Mr. Enos not joining us tonight? What happened? Do you know?
He had a dental emergency, and that's the reason he gave that he couldn't attend.
Okay, thank you. Do you have advice for how to perhaps more forcefully request from the school board members to explain their take on the financial, the financial impact? Because when we speak at school board meetings, they are not allowed to respond to us. That's purely the citizen comment. And I have found that sending an email doesn't really get a response. So it's their financial obligation to steward and shepherd the money for the district. And how do we try to get an answer?
One way potentially is to talk to the chief financial officer and arrange a meeting with that person and get their feedback, because they know, I mean, they're making their budgets for next year, and they are somewhat in the dark because none of the school districts control the front door. You don't know how many students are going to, even if nothing changes with current legislation, school districts don't know in advance. They can guess, but they don't know the entire number of students that are going to leave the school district. So I am willing to bet your CFO has spreadsheet on spreadsheet that has students receiving vouchers, students in charter schools, students in traditional public schools, and can project them and can talk about the impact they anticipate. So if you can gain access to them, I think that would be a very enlightening activity. And if you want to connect, I can connect you to some folks in Hillsborough who've been working that angle, who can maybe give you some more suggestions. And Miami, too, for that matter.
If I could add to that, I had heard from school board members, previous school board members, members that retired, that there was actually a deficit this current year. And I heard that last summer. So I actually asked for information from the CFO and was provided with that information. Because last year legislation allowed that people within the private schools that were under the cap, they were actually allowed to opt in to a scholarship. and that cost over the district over $17,000 this current year. So there's already this current year been a 17 million, I think I said thousand, 17 million reduction in aid. This comes straight off the state aid. So that's just this year. But the district last year, now we do have a new situation with a very different school board. I don't know if it's going to be as easy to get the information that I did get last year.
And just in the
We'll
last
try.
couple of years, the expansion, even to 375% of the cap, has caused an explosion in folks taking advantage of those dollars. And again, why would they? But because of COVID and we've had a lot of federal money, we're like kind of okay this year. But once the COVID funds end at the end of 2024, it will be more than abundantly clear that we're really not okay. And I think any honest CFO will tell you that in the state.
Can I just throw something in there? Margie, thanks for the question. That was a great question. We are at SOS working on a new campaign, and that campaign is to bring pressure to bear on the school board to get them. We've stood up at board meetings and asked the questions, but we need to get more people to stand up at board meetings and put the questions to them. What are you going to do about this? What are your plans? What have you put in place? So far, we're not getting the answers, but if we get more people to show up at the board meetings, we may start getting some answers. It seems to work for people that want to walk their children to school or get rid of, social and emotional learning. Those seem to be on the agenda, and they're able to take care of that. So I think it's more than fair to ask our school board to please explain to us how you're going to make up these deficits. Thank you.
Okay, I saw a hand in the back there. Oh,
So Representative Askamani had a presentation last night, and she sort of brought this up, and I'm wondering if anybody up on the board can potentially expand on this as to how this is going to affect things like the Gardner scholarships, Bright Future scholarships, and things of that nature, because I believe the scuttlebutt on that is the children that currently qualify for those to get additional assistance to help them get their needs met. That's probably going to go away completely.
You mean the McKay and the Gardner? Yeah. Okay. So those are the family empowerment scholarships for kids with unique abilities. As of last summer, in the beginning of the school year, both of those programs were rolled in the family empowerment scholarships for kids with students with unique abilities. And you saw there's quite a waiting list, or I guess I didn't show you that. There is quite a waiting list, and that's used, ostensibly as an excuse why we need to expand these further. Did that help? Okay.
there's a hand in the back there.
I just
All right,
had a question on your comment on the private schools and demographics. Could a pop-up private school say, I don't know if this is extreme or not, but say they will not accept students of African American background?
That's a concern of mine. And that is the greatest concern that I have with Senate Bill 202 is the vagueness, extraordinary vagueness in the deregulation component. Now, the deregulation component is specifically about deregulating public schools. It's not talking at all about the regulation of private schools. It's not talking at all about that. My professional judgment would be, yeah, there's potential for that. And not just for African American students, but race, ethnicity, sexual identity, the demographics that are absolutely targets right now in our state. I have concern about that. How does a state, a Department of Education in a state, regulate a private school? It doesn't. It doesn't. So yeah, my answer to your question is absolutely. I'm concerned about that.
If I could give you an example of that, how loose there are a couple of regulations. They do have one regulation saying that teachers should have a college degree. However, that they have a loophole, that if a teacher has a special skill, that's okay. They don't even have to have an 8th grade education if they have a special skill. Now, here in Sarasota, I did a study, I think it was about 2 years ago. It was written up in Critical Times of the Sarasota private school situation. At that point, I think there were 37 of these voucher accepting schools. Now it's down a little bit. I just looked at it recently to 34. Now 60% of them are religious schools in Sarasota. It's even higher in the state. There's a higher average in the state. In Sarasota, it's 60%. Now some of them, a couple of them are kind of more traditional Catholic schools. Some of the Catholic schools that are the most prestigious will have a couple of vouchers. They don't open it up generally. A lot of them, however, are the Christian fundamentalist schools. And that's where you see discrimination, either covertly or even overtly. Now, a lot of the schools were called on that because they were particularly discriminating against LGBTQ students or parents even. That some of them had in their regulations that if a parent was LGBTQ, that would disqualify. There was a big stink made about it, so they all took that out of their handbooks. However, it's so easy to discriminate. It's so easy. Supposedly, they also cannot discriminate on the basis of race because that's federal law. That's not allowed, but it's so easy. And I know from being a professional in education, even some of the charter schools would do this, and definitely the private schools. They'd say, well, we just don't have the services to support your child. So we just don't have it. It's not in your child's self-interest to stay here. And that's how they're, gently forced out. Yeah.
I think so much of this is covert. Yeah. But with intentional confusion.
So is there anything that any of us can do to help stem this flow at this point in time? Or do we just have to let it happen and hope for something in the future? I mean, I tend to be an activist. I got tired of being an activist, but it's very clear to me that I got to get a kick in the butt and become an agent again. So tell me what to do.
Okay, thank you, Agent. On behalf of public schools, not a secret agent. We want a very public agent. And what really needs to happen? Can we stop this train? I don't know. But I think that the conversation is now out there about what this costs, what this means. And so what I would encourage you is to call a legislator, visit them when they're home. And what we're asking people to do is to find ways to hold what they call the Florida Educational Finance Program, which is a big, hairy calculation of how they distribute the state and local education funds, and ask them to line item vouchers, take them out of the Florida Educational Finance Program funds, because that way they go very quietly out the door. If there's a line item, then we would be able to monitor the expenditure, and I fully expect that we would see the same thing that happened in Arizona to happen here. So I would do that. I would say leave the caps where they are. In the pre-K through 12 Appropriations Committee a few weeks back, they did a presentation and they're not even spending all the money. So I'm not sure why we really need to expand the caps except to give access to millionaires when we're not spending the money as it is. So have them keep the caps. And the governor, this has been a very quiet thing, but the governor does have a conforming bill on his budget website that keeps the caps at 375% of the federal poverty level. It does allow for home education students, but of the three possibilities, HB1, SB 202, or the conforming bill, that one is the best. That one is the least worst.
Could you explain what a conforming bill is?
Sorry. So the government in legislation, they have to, well, this is his proposal, first of all, for school choice. He said, I'm for school choice, but I don't know about universal. If that's the way to go. So what he did was to outline his proposal for what school choice looks like in his mind. So it's just a fancy word for his proposal. Oh, sorry, please.
I just want to add to the question of what can we do, and I want to echo what Lisa was saying earlier. I think our community has a lot of power in going to the school board. It's unfortunate that it is public comment and that they don't respond to us. I agree with that comment earlier. But attendance at school board meetings and taking a neighbor there, even if you don't have kids, sometimes I think that there's a belief that my kids are out of school and so that this isn't a concern of mine, but public education is the bedrock of the community. So it ought be a concern of all of our neighbors. I was having a discussion earlier tonight and with friends that Sarasota schools are so good. Sarasota County public schools are so good that when they move to the state, they say, oh, which area of town should I live in? You know, because I want to put my kid in the best school. They said, it really doesn't matter what area of town you live in because all the public schools, K through 12, are good choices for different reasons. One of the biggest debates, my daughter's moving into high school next year. So we have visited all of the high school roundups, right? Come to Sarasota High School, this is what we offer. Come to Riverview High School, come to Pineview if you qualify, come to Venice if you want to. So we've gone to all of these meetings, and the discussion that the moms are having in the parking lot is, they're all such good choices. Which one do we pick? These are all such great schools, and that is what the public needs to be reminded of. We want to continue that reputation. That's the reputation that's at stake. And so if we can get, people coming to the school board meetings and talking about, we don't want to lose the strength of our Sarasota County schools. At the state level, it's a different conversation. But if you want to act at the local level, I think that would be a really powerful thing to do. Oh, Rebecca, did you want to add to that?
When you do attend school board meetings, I know that I and a lot of my colleagues would love to see some positive comments going back to how wonderful our schools really are. I would love to hear some positive comments specifically about the great things that our schools are doing, and for our community to recognize that.
So I have a couple questions and maybe a statement also because I like to talk. But number one, are the school board across the state and their associations, are they supportive of those two bills that we're talking about, or is there any pushback about it? Secondly, is there anything that the federal government can do? I assume the federal government allocates an enormous amount of money to the state of Florida. And is there anything that they can do through their legislation or their appropriation to basically tell the state of Florida, if you do this kind of thing, we are going to either eliminate or reduce the compensation or the monies that you get? So those are a couple questions. I would like to say that I grew up in Sarasota and graduated. I had a number of children graduate from Pineview and from Sarasota High School. All of those experiences were fabulous. I think in my extended family, certainly we probably had 20 graduates of the Sarasota school system, and we're very proud to be a part of that. It's a shame that where we're going today. I would like to say also that in recent contacts with folks that are in touch with our local legislative delegation, their response to almost anything and everything is, the governor wants this. We don't have any way to do anything about it. It's an abdication of legislative responsibility across the board to the governor for fear of retribution. and that's a very sad state. So I think these bills will pass, unfortunately. So we're really talking about looking to the future and what are we going to do as a community, as a state, and a state about the future. That's where it's all going to have to come down to when the citizens of the state finally realize what's happened to us.
If I could add to the latter, it's not just public education that's under attack, even within education. If you look at what's happening in higher education, that's equally horrendous. If you especially look just a few miles from here at New College, Support Our Schools realizes that it's all one fight. And if we can combine forces, and we've been talking about coalition building, that if we can combine forces, that's a pretty big lobby right there. If the college students are getting in motion, that often starts things. That's certainly in my lifetime, a person that was around in the 60s and the 70s. What happened on college campuses was so key in ending a very unpopular war at the time. So I'm actually much more hopeful now than I have been for a while, because I see people are understanding what's going on. It takes a while. A lot of these things are slow. The attacks on public education in schools, you don't really see it that much, but then there often gets to a point where eyes are open, and I think we're at that stage now that eyes are being open. I know at SOS, that Support Our Schools, that's what we call ourselves, we're getting more and more parents coming to school board meetings. Like every meeting, there's more of us, and that's so critical. So even though the material we're presenting tonight is kind of depressing, I actually feel that we're moving forward, and it's not, as I said in the end of my presentation, we'll probably lose this battle. Maybe I'm actually pleased to hear that the governor is doing something slightly half decent. Maybe there is a chance to get that through. That would be better than nothing. But I think we have to have a medium and a long-term strategy on all this stuff. And there are people, like was mentioned, Representative Escamani is just doing a really wonderful job on all levels. She's going around to all the college campuses. She's actually having training sessions with students. So there's a lot happening that people don't hear about.
I wanted to say thank you to the people. I always call you all Save Our Schools, because that's how I look at you instead of just Support Our Schools. One of the things that we could do locally to answer part of your question is, several people won this last school board meeting in Sarasota County because not enough people bothered to vote. I think there's a whole lot of people who didn't bother to vote, and it would have been very different. But it is different now. And when we were trying to save the superintendent to not cost us several $100,000 that could have gone to our schools and our children, we lost. But that room was full. That room was absolutely full of people. And since that's been done, not as many people are showing up. There may be some more moms coming, and that's great, more parents coming. But the room isn't full. And we need the room to be full with people who are not thinking like crazy people, who are talking reasonably. And we need to not just sit there, but also some more people need to speak up. The Herald Tribune is very happy to take letters from us, letters to write an op-ed. They will take those. So many of you are probably great writers. Start writing. Also send messages to the school board members, even the Mothers of Liberty ones that you don't think will listen. Go ahead and send them. We have to let them know that we're here.
I'd like to ask two questions. One is a repeat of a question that was asked before of, is there any possibility that federal money will be lost as a result of these new bills? And the other question is, so what's happening in Arizona now? You know, how do they like it now?
So they're, Arizona's in a difficult situation because they have a Democratic governor and more Republican House. So just like we have our sticky situation here, they have that as well. But they're really being forced to figure out how to pay for this because they missed the mark completely. And it was the same situation as when HB1 came out, and they're like, there's no fiscal impact to this bill. That's what they said in Arizona, too. And now they're trying to figure out how to, curtail this. There's some positive news in Idaho last week. Idaho successfully shut down a universal voucher proposal in their legislature. And they did it by talking on both sides of the aisle and saying this is not a fiscally responsible move. We're not taking good care of our taxpayers' dollars. We don't have any control over it. There's no accountability in these voucher schools. And we don't know, we're not being good stewards. So thinking about, fiscal, that is my lane. So you'll just have to indulge me, but really getting them to think along, what is a responsible fiscal position, even if there aren't other arguments to make, is what I would say. And I don't know what the feds are. I'm not going to speculate on whether they would intervene.
Thank you for sharing that, because I'd like to add to that in terms of we have, the state controls the school system, right? That's in our U.S. Constitution. So federally, I think that the answer to your question is a difficult one. What would it take for the federal legislation? Because states control public education. The point that you were making about school boards and that this is a fiscal issue, I really think that if we send the message that because it's a fiscal issue, it can be a nonpartisan issue. This should not be a partisan issue. And if we can send that message to our neighbors and to our friends that might not might not be politically aligned with us for whatever reason, that this really is a nonpartisan issue. This is a fiscal issue, and this is a community issue that I think we can really bond on that. And I think we can quiet the noise that really escalated in this past year if we can send that message that this is not good for our community, certainly. And Carol alluded to how it's not, democratic at its core, democracy at its core is what's under attack. But I was kind of looking forward to the school board member coming today too, because I thought that was going to have a presence of how we have a unified voice, that we are concerned about the fiscal responsibility. So hopefully there'll be another opportunity for that to happen, where we can have this open discourse. I'm hoping for that. If anybody can organize it, it's SOS. They can make it happen.
I'd like to add one more thing on Arizona. Some people may have heard me give this little speech before. It's a very interesting situation there. They have a group there called Save Our Schools, which is one reason we're not called that, because it was already taken. But they have played a very active role in this whole thing. I think it was like 3 years ago or 4 years ago, they actually tried to get this universal voucher bill, this education savings account thing, through. And they did, and then this group did a recall on the ballot, and they thought they were going to lose. But they organized, they got teachers involved, they got parents involved. It was throughout the state, and they actually won by, I think it was like 70%. They were just totally shocked. It was a real David and Goliath situation. but they won. Then what happened with this bill? It only passed by one vote. Yeah, one vote got it through. Arizona is a changed state, and it's largely because of the fight with education. Red for Ed, if people know about that was the teachers' unions decided, hey, teachers need to be paid more. So they did this big nationwide Red for Ed movement, particularly in southern and southwestern states where teacher salaries were particularly low and had tremendous effect. So you had that, and then you had this parent-initiated Save Our School group becoming really powerful in Arizona. Out of that, they got a lot of people to run for office. Arizona is now like a purplish state. Used to be, what? Deep red. Used to be one of the deepest red states in the nation. It was the struggle over education that really changed it. So to me, that's one of the reasons why I, as a retired educator, I'm now working many more hours than when I was an educator. That's why I'm in this, because I think education is really key for making change in Sarasota. I moved here and I love Sarasota. I've been really sick about what has happened. I certainly want to save Sarasota, and the way to do that, I think, is through changing the dynamic of education is critical. Let's get this back to be at least a purple state.
Sissy, hi. You keep referencing to go to the school board and ask about the financials, etc. But what power does the school board have? If this passes in Tallahassee, they have to carry out what the bill says. And so the financials seems to me it's a little irrelevant because they're just going to have to somehow do it whether they want to or not. So their opinion doesn't seem to be relevant. And also, we've got Joe Gruters, who has a lot of clout and was the head of the education and 3 young kids in public schools. What's his opinion? Has anyone reached out to him? Because I would think he would be more influential than our school board would in Tallahassee.
He's remaining quiet, but I think that's a really important target, in part because he got the Florida Education Association's endorsement when he was running. So he has done some favors. Part of him is actually kind of for public education. Part of him is drawn into the kind of swamp. But I think he's critical. We have there's an information sheet on your desk. I don't know, on the table. I don't know if we're going to actually go into that a little bit more at the end. Am I correct on that? So I'll save that. But there is a plan to do a big legislative push. You also have a what is that called, Lisa? QR card, right? That goes to a campaign that FEA, Florida Education Association, is running. They're calling it the 3-7 campaign because the legislative session opens tomorrow, March 7th. So the 3 is for March and the 7th. But they're asking you to call 3 legislators and send 7 emails in a coordinated way. I think that's going to be discussed a little bit at the end. But I do think on the school board, I think if a school board speaks out, that maybe they can't do anything, but that's really important. We actually tried to get that to happen. I think someone else mentioned that, Lisa, I guess, mentioned that, and it was interesting. This was a couple of board meetings ago when they were actually considering their legislative agenda. So our message was, yeah, let's put this HB1 and 202 on the top. Then Tom Edwards actually made a motion to do that, and he couldn't get a second. I mean, it was really sad. Bridget Ziegler, as chair, asked for a second, silence. She asked again for a second, silence. None of them would speak up. But that's why we invited Tim here, because we're hoping that maybe he will speak up. We'll see. He still can.
So in the past, I've lived here like 40 years, so I have family like you that have gone through the public schools. In the past, the Sarasota business community has been collaborated with the schools. They've been very proud of the schools. The Realtor Association has sold Sarasota on our schools. I wondered what you've done to try to reach out to them. They're a powerful force and a red force generally in the community. And I wonder if that might be a road of collaboration that you could pursue. Because I don't think we should give up. I think we should try to
Definitely.
stop this. Thanks.
Yeah. We have actually had some reach out to us recently, saying that they're very concerned about what's going on. Real estate is a big one, and that's a big thing to say to residents in general that own homes, because homes are only high if the school districts are strong. If our school districts go down, the real estate's gonna go down also. So I think that's a really, really important message, and that's part of what SOS has been talking about in our coalition building. That is one stream that we want to reach out to is the business community.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jill Lewis-Spector, and I'm here from the League of Women Voters of Sarasota. I am on the board of directors for the State League, and I chair the state's Education Action Team, as well as the Sarasota Education Action Team. And I have had the pleasure this past several weeks of working with Support Our Schools to put this panel together. It has been just a great experience working with Lisa and with Carol and Angela, and I think that it's a wonderful organization, and we are very much interested in being collaborative. So in that vein, I have a question that I want to ask the panelists, since we get a turn too as the league. If you were drafting an advertisement to educate folks about the implications of HB1 and SB 202, what would your ad say? Who'd like to go first? Noreen?
I mean, honestly, I mean, it should come from a parent. It should come from a teacher. I mean, they see me coming, they're like, oh, dollar policy wonk, whatever. You know, my message is effective, you know, within my scope of practice. But I think it's parents who are passionate about public schools, which when I'm not being a policy analyst, my son had excellent experience in public schools, entered college, a second semester sophomore, bright futures, the whole 9 yards. So I'm definitely passionate on that front as a parent. And so I'm not going to give you the content, but I would say the messenger really needs to be from the horse's mouth, the people experiencing this for better or for worse. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay. Leonie?
Do you want like a slogan?
Whatever your ad would say.
My ad would say so many things. But I think one of the messages that I would want to send would be a universal message of how beautiful Sarasota County is. And I think that I would want my ad to really focus on the beauty of Sarasota County and what makes Sarasota County beautiful. There's initiatives that Keep Sarasota Beautiful. A lot of it is environmental messages. But I think I would want to piggyback on that message and what it means to keep Sarasota beautiful. And I think that's how you might get the business community involved. Why are you here? What brought you here? Why do you remain here? Let's be reminded of those ideals and those values. And I think that would be a very interesting campaign.
Yeah, thank you. Rebecca.
I think I'd just reiterate what I said earlier, that any decrease in funding is absolutely unacceptable and it's untenable. A lot of people in the community on all sides of the political spectrum would like us to do more. More of this, more of that. Whatever it is, more takes more. We can't do more with less. And so any decrease in funding, like I said, will just not work.
Great.
For our students, for our schools.
So your ad would be about money. Yeah. Okay. I want to tell you a little bit about the League. We are a nonpartisan organization. We want to engage voters, engage citizens in their communities, with their government. And also, I want to give you a little bit of hope. Tomorrow, some of us are headed to Tallahassee. It's lobby days. And we are going to be speaking with our representatives and others about these bills, these terrible bills that are taking so much money away from the schools. We have already testified 3 times in front of legislators, telling them why these bills should be rejected. We will continue to do that. We also are already working with different alliances on the state level. So FEA has an alliance. Families for Strong Public Schools has an alliance. And we are working with them to make sure that all of us are on the same page and are working to advocate for better funding for public schools and getting rid of some of the onerous things that are in these bills. We also are very concerned about the current bills because we feel they are a kind of Robin Hood in reverse. They are taking money away from poor communities and giving it to people who are already able to pay for private schools for their children. So we are extremely concerned about that, as well as the attempt to level the playing field by reducing the standards in public schools. So if you look at this brochure that's on your table, you'll see on the inside we have public schools, charter schools, and private schools. And we have checks next to those things that each type of school is required to do. Can I get some water? Is there water there? Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry.
I'll just pour this into my glass.
That's all right. This is good. Thank you. Sorry, I'm good. Thank you. So there are checks next to each thing that every type of school is required to do. As we try to level the playing field, the checks that are there by the public schools will be eliminated in many of those areas. For instance, teachers are certified. That check will be gone. Okay? Some of the other things has neighborhood school locations. Well, these kids are going to be going everywhere. There won't be any neighborhood schools. The schools have been places where parents would get to know other parents. Kids would become friends with other kids in their communities, and they get to play with each other and do homework together and go on trips together because it's a neighborhood. Those things will be gone. Full offering of art, music, and physical education. I want to give you another piece of hope. I was with the countywide Arts Education Partnership Group this past Thursday. There are about 40 different organizations, opera, dance, theater, music. They also have representatives from the public schools, the music coordinator for the whole district, the art coordinator for the whole district. And together, we talked about vouchers and universal vouchers and HB1 and S202 and what was happening. They were shocked and they were angry because they know that the arts will be one of the very first things that gets cut. And so they're forming an advocacy group. They're going to speak at board meetings. They're also going to go up to Tallahassee and complain. And that's another thing we can be doing as citizens. We can complain at the state level, not just the local level. Okay? It's really, really important. So the final thing that really concerns me about these vouchers, and it has concerned me since I moved to Sarasota just about 2 years ago from New Jersey, where things are a little different. I am very concerned about the weakening of the separation of church and state. This has been going on since vouchers started, okay? Money is going with these vouchers to religious schools that discriminate. You can't be a student here because you're gay. You can't teach here because you're not the right religion, or your family structure isn't what we want our kids to have. And what happens as a result of this weakening of separation? It's not only does the public school end up with the kids who have unique learning challenges and kids with behavioral problems, but we have separate little silos throughout the state based on religion, based on ethnicity, skin color, whether you like drama. I mean, every school has a different value that is highlighted and that these kids get indoctrinated in while they're attending the school. And what are these kids going to do when they get out of school and they have to work in a place that has all different kinds of people there? That is not going to help the economy, which seems to be a big concern. And for some of these bills, it's the impetus. Okay? The higher education bills, I have to tell you, today I was working on writing talking points for the people who will be speaking, giving testimony in opposition to these terrible higher ed bills, because they do the same thing. They don't let you think about anything critically. You have to accept indoctrinated ideas, and only ideas that are acceptable to some people. So, do advocate. Please contact the Support Our Schools group, as well as the Sarasota League of Women Voters. We have organized to be effective advocates for Sarasota public schools and for the state's public schools, and we would love to have you join with us. We want to thank our panelists who've been so good tonight. They've given us so much information and inspiration, and your questions were terrific. So let's give a big hand to the panelists. Thank you. And thank you for your commitment and passion for public education.